Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name's Rosario and sometimes I read books. So today I'm going to be doing one of my favourite videos to watch, which is my favourite books of 2023. I always love watching these, so I'm so excited to be doing my own one. So I've picked out 10 of my favourite reads from 2023 because if there's any more, I'll probably be talking all day. So just an overview of 2023. I read 60 books, which I think is really good for me, considering I was studying part-time. The first part of the year was really busy. I was working, I was trying to have other hobbies and a social life and all of that. So I think 60 is really good for me. 2023 is also the first year that I actually tracked everything I read with like a spreadsheet, which I probably won't go into. I'll just go through all my favourite books in this video. But it's really interesting to look and go through everything that I read, how much I read, what genres I read, etc, etc. Which I might do another video about, but maybe not. Maybe I'll do another one next year when I compare 2023 to 2024. Okay, so first of all, in spot number 10, we have Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. So I feel like everyone's heard about this book because it's been doing its rounds. I gave into the hype, and you know what, I'm glad I gave into the hype. So this follows two characters, Iris and Kit, and they're kind of rivals at this newspaper fighting for this columnist position in this world that's kind of set in like this fantasy World War One kind of era, and there's this war going on between two gods, and then the humans are kind of like fighting for the gods, and they both kind of get involved in this within this war and this conflict going on. It's very much like a romance with some little bits of fantasy. It's not overly fantasy-ish. It's very much set in World War One kind of era with fantasy elements in it. It's not like overly fantasy-ish, which I actually thought worked quite well. I liked that. I thought it was really interesting. I know some people are like, oh, it's like World War One fan fiction, but I mean, yeah, maybe it is a little bit, but I quite liked that. I thought it was interesting and I thought it was fun. I'm a bit of a romance hater, so it was a shock to me that I actually thought that the relationship was really cute. I don't know if it's because of it's like a YA fantasy that I thought it was just like sweet and wholesome, and it is like rivals to lovers, but it's not super rivals. It's very like not cutesy rivals, but they're not bantering loads and loads. It's very kind of like sweet and kind of wholesome with a tiny bit of banter. It's not kind of like, I think people think that it's going to be really like witty banter between them, but they just kind of like mildly dislike each other because they're rivals. And people say that it's a little bit insta-lovey, but I didn't think it was. I thought it was like, you know, they're writing to each other and they have these magical kind of typewriters that transport their letters to each other, but they open up to each other about things that they don't open up to with other people. So I mean, that's not very insta-love to me. I didn't think it was very insta-lovey. I thought it was quite cute and wholesome, and you know, they open up to each other about things that is going on in both their lives, and I thought it was quite cute. There's one bit in it that I didn't like as much, but then, you know, the ending kind of redeems itself. So I think it's worth the hype. I really enjoyed it. I've just read Ruthless Vows, which is the sequel, and I also really like that. Okay, and then number 9, we have The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson, which is kind of a Carrie retelling, but set in this kind of like small American town with a mixed race main character. So it's kind of a YA thriller with kind of like horror-ish elements, I guess, because it's a Carrie retelling. What I really liked about it is the way that it kind of takes this kind of horror story and it kind of uses it to look at race relations in like small American towns. So we follow Maddie, who is like a white passing mixed race girl. The story is told in 2 timelines. There's one timeline that's the present, and it's kind of like this podcast that's looking into this event that happens at the prom, and it's kind of like this almost like a myth, almost like this thing that's happened, and they're trying to see what they're like investigating into and being like, well, did Maddie do this, blah blah blah. And then the other timeline is Maddie's perspective back in 2014, I think it is, when this event's happening. So you're following 2014 and then the present day when this podcast is kind of like looking into what happened at this prom. So I listened to the audiobook, which I think contributes as well to why I enjoyed this so much, because it has all the little effects and stuff in it. When the podcasters will have different voices, stuff like that, which I thought was really well done. I recommend the audiobook for that. But overall, I thought it was a really good in terms of the narrative of moving things along in a way that's really engaging, and you really want to find out what's happened and how all this whole storyline comes together, how all the characters are involved. And also, I think, especially for a YA book, it does a really good job at looking at deeper issues. Next up, we have The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz, which is a horror book which just descended into chaos. It follows a group of women who are going on this writing retreat at this famous author who kind of writes this kind of like feminist horror kind of books, and she's like really renowned and she's like really quite famous, but she's very reclusive, so I don't think we all know too much about her. So she invites these women on this writing retreat, and then things just descend into chaos. There's like a murder mystery, they're all isolated in this cabin and they're snowed in. You don't know what's going on. One minute one thing's happening and next minute another thing's happening. People disappearing. It's craziness, but I think the craziness works. There's loads of twists and turns. I quite like the subtle like undertones of like messy relationships and like messiness. It was messy but good. That's what I'll say for that. If you like chaotic stories, horror, you don't mind a little bit of chaos in there, I'd recommend this one. Next up at number 7, we have A Strong Female Character by Fern Brady, which is a memoir. I think it's like one of the only non-fictions I read, but it's essentially her memoir told through the lens of looking at her autism diagnosis that she got later in life. So I like how it's obviously a memoir of her life, but she also kind of includes different things about autism in women and how women are diagnosed later in life and all these things that are kind of missed. And she kind of highlights the like failures of systems to do with like mental health and also diagnosing people, especially women and girls, in a very like informative but also humorous way at the same time, especially when you look at events in her life. And she also brings up lots of interesting points about being a stripper and how actually the environment and the kind of job of stripping is actually quite appealing to women who are autistic for different reasons. And I also thought that she brought up lots of different interesting things about how women who are autistic might have meltdowns and things like that just aren't talked about. It was interesting but informative and also funny. I think she just talks about lots of things that are really important, and I'd recommend it to everyone. I listened to the audiobook, which she narrates herself, which I think really adds something, because you can hear, like when someone's narrating their own audiobook, you really hear the emphasis and the way that things are intended to come across, like the tone of voice. So I'd highly recommend that. Okay, and then next up, number 6, is Sundial by Katrina Ward, who I think, if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know that I love. And I got this special edition with sprayed edges for Christmas. So Sundial follows Rob, who has a daughter, and she's noticed her daughter has done something which is quite disturbing, and she decides to go back to her childhood home as she thinks the answer to whatever's happened lies there, which is a very cryptic description, but I feel like you really just have to go from there, and too much will just spoil it. So it's very creepy, very gothic in a way. This story that kind of examines nature versus nurture, and it's kind of split between the present, which is Rob taking her daughter Callie to this Sundial home, which is kind of like this isolated house in the desert where she grew up, and taking her daughter there because she thinks it's going to help. And then the other timeline is Rob as a child growing up at Sundial, and it kind of follows her and her sister and her parents and kind of the way she was raised, which is very unorthodox, a bit strange. Her parents were a bit hippie, very isolated, and it was so good. I remember sitting in bed and reading like over half of it in one day because I was just so gripped by it and wanted to know what was happening. With Katrina Ward, there's so many different twists and turns, and one thing that you think you know it turns out to be something completely different, and she just does it so well. I'd say read the trigger warnings beforehand though, because there's quite a lot of things that you might want to know before you go into it. But if you like twists and turns, if you like creepy things, if you like isolated settings, if you like nature versus nurture, those kind of themes, pick this one up. It's really, really good. And then at number 5, I have Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I read The Poppy War in 2022 and I read all 3 in the series and I loved it. So when she came out with this, I was like, I'm getting straight on it. It's essentially one of those books that's gone round, I think, as well. Everyone probably knows what it's about. But it's essentially like a literary fiction kind of satire about publishing industry. And it follows a white author who essentially steals her friend's manuscript, who is Asian, and steals her story and publishes it after her friend dies in like this freak accident. And then it kind of follows her on this kind of like her publishing the story and all of her feelings and all of the crazy justifications she makes for kind of stealing this story and publishing it. It kind of looks at publishing industry, racism. It kind of turns into a bit of a thriller, a really good look at who owns stories, who they belong to, kind of this look inside someone's brain who is like doing and being completely unhinged in a very racist way. I also went to the event for this book during the summer, which I think really made me appreciate the way that it was written, and hearing R.F. Kuang talk about writing this book, the inspiration for it, and everything that went into it. And I also got this lovely special edition, Yellowface. Ooh. And then at number 4, Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead by Emily Austen. Our main character, Gilda, who is an atheist and a lesbian, and she is a bit depressed, so she goes to try and sign up for some therapy at this local church. I think it's free therapy, which is like obviously the draw, because I mean, who can afford therapy these days? She gets there and she gets mistaken for the new receptionist, and too awkward to say no, she's not there for that. She kind of just goes along with it and ends up becoming the receptionist at this church when she knows nothing about religion. I'd say it's very funny. I thought it was very relatable in some ways. I think especially if you have had any kind of anxiety or any kind of mental health struggles, I think there's like a level of relatability there. Or you've just got yourself into situations where you feel too awkward to say no to. That's also relatable, but it's also quite depressing at the same time. And there's lots of really bleak moments, but I think they're done in such a kind of funny way that it's kind of enjoyable to read. Don't think everyone would love it, but I really loved it. I thought it was funny and relatable, and Gilda's this kind of like oddball character who is also really like struggling with depression and loneliness. But I think it gives like a really realistic depiction of those things at the same time, as well as being funny. There's also this side plot of the person who was the church's receptionist before Gilda. Maybe there's something suspicious that's gone on there, and this kind of like little mystery of what happened to the woman before her in the job. Being inside this character's head is bizarre, but also somehow enjoyable. At number 3, we have Rules for Vanishing by Alice Kate Marshall, a YA horror about a group of teenagers who go to this woods to look for one of their friends who has disappeared. It's like local ghost tale that if you go to the road and you do these certain things, this girl will appear, and there's this road that she went missing on years and years ago. She will appear and, you know, things will happen. They essentially go to this road and, you know, things start happening. It's so creepy. This is one of the only books that I would not read at night because I got so freaked out by it. It was really creepy. I liked all the characters. Characters were all really different, and usually in books where there's those different characters, you can sometimes get confused about who's who because of sometimes they're a bit too similar, but every character was really different, and it was kind of full of all these different twists and turns. And I think that the way it was narrated was done very well. So the format's really interesting because it plays around with time a little bit, and also it's written kind of like a case file, and you're kind of looking back, so you see different, what they call like excerpts and witness statements from different people. That kind of tells the tale, and it creates a very like interesting narrative to read when you have excerpts and you're trying to figure out, okay, so this person said this person said this, and you can really like see different parts of the story and how different people's interpreting different things. It was really, really good. Especially I think for a YA horror, it was so good. I couldn't put it down, apart from at night when I definitely put it down. And then at number 2, the runner-up is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver, which it took me a long time to read because it's massive, but It was amazing. We essentially follow Demon Copperhead, who is born in the southern states of America into like a very rural, poor area. It's kind of based loosely on David Copperfield by Dickens. I think that's where the inspiration comes from. And it's kind of this tome essentially that follows Demon from being a child up till his early like adulthood years, and we kind of go through his life, follow him, and we get to know him so well. We get to know all the characters in his life. It's very much a character driven kind of story, but the thing that I loved the most was the way that Barbara Kingsolver characterized him and made everything, his voice was so distinctive. The way that it was narrated felt very much like a very real character was talking to you, and he was just so well characterized. Everything that was written was very much in his voice, and to do that for such a long book I think is amazing. It also looks at these people that are kind of ignored, how like people in these parts of society are ignored, and also looks at the opioid crisis and like the effects of that on people and just in society. I loved it. It's like one of those books where you get to the end and you feel like you think about that book, you turn the final page, but you're still thinking about that character, thinking how are they doing. It was so good. I'd highly recommend if you like character-driven novels. I love the beginning and the end as well, like how they kind of link the beginning page and the end page, but so good. I don't actually own it, and I think a lot of these books I don't actually own. I own 3 of them, so maybe I need to buy it. In number 1 spot, I own this one because I loved it so much, is Looking Glass Sound by Katrina Ward. Are you shocked? And look at this special edition I got. It's from Broken Binding. It's also signed. It's got such nice sprayed edges. Look at the sprayed edges. It just like continues on round. Which is essentially follow Wilder. The book's kind of split in 2 parts. So we follow Wilder, and we follow his like kind of like early adolescence. So growing up in this like kind of town where there's this creepy kind of man. There's kind of like this coming of age in a way, where it's him and his friends and all different things they get up to. The second half is kind of about Wilder, who writes a memoir about his life and especially about his childhood in this place, in the town with the Dagger Man, and how later in life his friend steals his manuscript and publishes it under his own name, and Wilder kind of like trying to figure this out, like the kind of ramifications of that. Things kind of descend from that point. It's also kind of like a book within a book. You get bits of Wilder's memoir and you get the stolen memoir, and it's kind of like a mixture of different things. There's so many twists, so many turns, hidden messages. There's all of these different mind-bending things going on at the same time. After I finished it, I was like, what the fuck, but in a good way. I can't explain how good I thought this was. I know that it's not for everyone, because I've seen lots of people say that they thought it was disappointing or too confusing, but I feel like I really want to reread it because it'll be amazing to reread. So many things that you just think you thought you knew, it turns out you didn't. And I think maybe some people think it's too much in this one, but I don't. I think it's just enough. I think it's confusing and fantastic, amazing. I really like the kind of blend of different things going on. You get that kind of coming of age bit at the beginning, which it just feels like it's a, you know, someone writing his memoir about his childhood, and then you get his memoir but from someone else, where someone else has edited it and changed things. So yes, my number 1 read. I'd recommend if you like anything that sounds a little bit confusing, but also, you know, twisty, a little bit gothic, creepy and wild, stories that are really layered. You kind of look back and you're like, okay, that makes sense. Okay, so yes, that is my number 1 read. I'm not sure I would recommend it actually to everyone, but I think if you have a similar reading taste to me and you don't mind being a little bit confused about things, definitely give it a read. Yeah, I don't think everyone's gonna like it, but I certainly did. Will you read Looking Glass Sound? I'd say I'd recommend it, even if I don't think everyone will like it. I think it's like a really interesting and unique book, so I think everyone should read it. But yes, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what your number 1 read of 2023 is, if you've read any of these. Thank you so much for watching. I'll be back again with another video, hopefully not too long. I'm aiming for a video every 2 weeks, which I don't think is too much to ask for. So hopefully I should see you again soon. Thank you for watching and happy 2024. Bye!